Good evening. The joint meeting of the Marshfield Community Development Authority and the Marshfield Council Chambers in the Council Chambers, Tuesday, October 29th at 5:30 is in session. Call to order, roll call. Council here and President Keel.
All of the members.
Push the button. Yep, there you go.
I've done that. Anyway, all of the members of the commission are here.
Thank you. Public comment? Is there any public comment? Any public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to presentation. Review proposed request for qualifications RFQ for redevelopment of the facility currently operated by Weinbrenner Shoe Company Incorporated, introduced by Steve Bard, City Administrator, presenter by Jackie Misch, Vanderwall and Associates.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, yes, we're excited to be here tonight. Glad to have the CDA with us and the council jointly to talk about the future of that property that is currently occupied by Weinbrenner Shoe Company on the west end of downtown. Many of you know that we've had Vanderwall and Associates as our consultant on this project going way back to the development of the West 2nd Street plan, and they've been with us through the first phase of implementation. We're moving into the second phase now. Excited to have this opportunity. Certainly the Weinbrenner property is a key piece of the redevelopment of that west side. So been blessed to be working with Jackie Misch over the last couple of years, and very glad to have her here this evening to walk through the proposed request for qualifications and answer your questions. We look forward to a good discussion tonight as we turn our attention toward redevelopment of that property. So Jackie, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Steve, for that introduction. Before I dive into the RFQ itself, just wanted to share a reminder for everybody of the activities that we've been busy with over the last year or so with regards to the Weinbrenner building. So in particular, we've been encouraging proactive reuse planning. We've been working with the project management team on identifying needs for environmental assessments, needs for coordinating with the Wisconsin Historical Society on the building because it is on the National and State Register of Historic Places. We've met with prospective developers about the potential interest in the building, prepared a draft schedule for reuse, and of course, in your package, you'll see a draft request for qualifications to recruit a developer and a partner for the project. Many of you know that the city also signed a development agreement with the Weinbrenner Company to relocate them, and so that's what's prompting the availability of this building for reuse. So briefly, I just wanted to discuss the goals of the RFQ process. Really, we see this as a pretty monumental opportunity for the city. The West 2nd Street District Plan envisioned the Weinbrenner building as a catalytic site for the rest of the district. So by that, we mean a successful project in this location can have a really significant ripple effect on other sites that are identified in the district, and also just on public and private investment within the district. People see something's cooking and something's exciting happening in the West 2nd Street District. They'll think differently about it and perhaps want to invest. And so that's why it's really important for us to get this right. And now is obviously the perfect time for this. As I mentioned before, Weinbrenner has a timeline for when they expect to leave that building. And the city already owns the building. This is a great position to be in. A lot of communities spend a lot of time trying to get site control before they can even start this process. So now is the time to seize this opportunity. Another key goal that I've expressed in the past is the desire to avoid having a vacant building. Not only is it not ideal to have a prominent building that's owned by the city be vacant, but there's also practical considerations. So for example, the city would, while the building is vacant, the city would be responsible for paying heat and cooling, if there is any, keeping that building secure, dealing with any vandalism, any liability. Those are things that would just be a lot cleaner and easier if the city never had to deal with any of those in the first place. So the very best thing would be to have a developer lined up so that when Weinbrenner vacates the building in spring of 2026, you could figuratively hand those keys right from Weinbrenner to the new occupant, and they can get started right away with no gap. So that's the goal. It's a timeline that has a lot of steps in it, and it is a complex process. So we're eager to get started right away to make sure that we can meet that goal. The last thing I want to note 2 is, yes, we're recruiting a developer for the building, but we're really seeking to have a partnership with the developer. We're looking for somebody we can work with. As I noted, it's a complex project. There's going to be a lot of steps. I think the funding sources that go into the project will be complex. And so we want somebody that we can trust and we can kind of go through all the obstacles together with them. So for that reason, we recommended it, and the city took our recommendation to pursue an RFQ process versus an RFP. So I just wanted to explain the difference briefly. The RFP is a request for proposal. So in that process, you would ask for a detailed proposal from a developer, and that's something that's a pretty significant investment for a developer to submit. They'd have to come up with designs for the building, specifics about perhaps the number of units and other details that require a lot of time and effort. Really what we're looking for is, as I mentioned before, a partner that we can work with. So a request for qualifications process requires the developer to submit their qualifications, their experience, tell us why they think they can pull off a project like this and show us that they've done so in the past. And then we can pick someone that we feel we can trust, we can work with, we can partner with successfully, whatever may come across. And so we're not requesting detailed plans or designs, again, oriented to finding the right partner. Great. So I'd like to provide an overview of the RFQ that was included in your packet. A quick note is if you have any comments on the text, like wordsmithing, proofreading, want something phrased differently, please send that directly to Steve Barg and we'll take care of those edits. I'd like to focus this discussion really on all of your objectives for the use of the building and any other higher level concerns that you may have about or ideas that you may have related to the RFQ. So as you'll see in your packet, the first section is a summary, just providing a kind of an executive summary of what we're trying to accomplish with this RFQ. And then it transitions into information about the building and the history of the building and existing conditions. So clarifying the zoning and the ownership, clarifying what environmental assessments have been done and where that information can be found. From there, it transitions into a description of the West 2nd Street redevelopment plan and the goals of that plan. Then it moves into the reuse objectives and potential reuses and funding sources for the project. And so we'll come back to this because this is something we specifically are looking for CDA and council input on. Next section is about what they need to submit in order to respond. So basically presenting their qualifications to us so that we can evaluate the team. And then the next section is how the city team or the CDA team will evaluate those responses. So what criteria will they'd be looking at in making their selection. And the last pages of the RFQ are the project schedule. So with that, I'm ready to move on to the reuse objectives and gathering CDA and council input on those items. Steve, before I move on, is there anything else? I don't want to jump ahead on the agenda.
No, that sounds right, Jackie. You're in the right place. Go for it.
All right, I'm going to move right into input here. The first thing I wanted to start with is just reminding both the CDA and the council of our vision for the West 2nd Street redevelopment district. And so I thought I'd present that in the form of this graphic that appears in that plan. This is an eye-level graphic looking east down West 2nd Street. You can see on the right of your screen is the reused Weinbrenner Company building. If you look at this image, you can see the vision embodies a highly walkable area. There's still a role for cars. As you can see, there's cars driving down the street and parked next to the sidewalk. But you can see it's a friendly place for walking and biking. There's enhanced sidewalks. There's many features like landscaping, signage, lighting, awnings. All this is oriented to people walking by. On both sides of the street, you see ground floor activity. So businesses or spaces that are open or available to the public, windows so you can see inside and what's going on. So that makes a really pleasant walking environment. So overall, just a really great place to walk around and explore. And then on the right side of the graphic, you see the reused Weinbrenner Shoe Company building. That building is enhanced and preserved. You can see it looks much like it does today, but ideally even spruced up a bit. In this image, we're envisioning some sort of ground floor activity. And in this case, it's a shop or a cafe with outdoor seating. So something that brings people in to the site, creates activity at the sidewalk level. And so this is something that allows people to enjoy the building in a way that today they cannot, right? Unless you work for the Weinbrenner company, you're not really getting to enjoy or interact with this building much. And so bringing in a ground floor use like this can really help connect this to people. So the next two slides are the reuse objectives that we've articulated in the RFQ. This is where I'd love to hear from folks about what they think we'd like to get out of this project. The idea here is that we articulate our reuse objectives, and then as a developer proposes a different project ideas, we can see whether that project meets our desired reuse objectives. And this is a way for us to allow for developers to be more creative instead of us simply saying, hey, this has to be residential on top with a coffee shop on the bottom. This is a way for us to say what we're looking for and allow creative proposals that meet these objectives that might not have been something that we thought of or considered. And so I think these are important to clarify and include in the RFQ. So briefly, I think everyone's on the same page about this. We want to see this building preserved and enhanced. So the historic features of the building, the hand-painted sign, it's an important historic landmark in the city, and we want to see that continue. We also would like to promote the history of the building. So if someone does a project, it'd be great if there'd be exhibits or some other homage that is available and visible to the public that kind of announces the history of the building and shares it. We want to activate West 2nd Street and South Walnut Street. So again, with those ground floor uses, bringing people into the building. We want to promote walkability. And then, at the same time, we want to make sure that there's adequate parking for residents and visitors. A few more objectives here. We want a project that increases the tax base. The idea here is to bring a new project online in terms of the village or the city's tax base, and a project that makes fiscal sense as well. Another objective is to use local contractors. And then, as I mentioned before, we want to see this project serve as a catalyst for redevelopment throughout West 2nd Street District. So this is in here because, for example, if someone suggested using the building for cold storage, that would not be a catalytic reuse. And I would argue it probably wouldn't meet a lot of these other reuse objectives as well. So it's a great screen for us to understand if these proposals meet our goals. So I will pause there. I'd love to hear from the two bodies about any modifications or additions or subtractions that they'd like to see in these reuse objectives.
Any questions from the council at this point? Seeing none, Andy, would you like to ask your board if they have any questions?
Yeah, are there any questions from the oh, wait a minute.
Nope, you were right first time. Yep. Push your button.
It should be red or green.
Pushing a button is complex. Can you hear me? Yeah, you
Yes,
can hear
perfect.
me now. Are there any questions from the CDA commissioners? Natasha, yes.
So are you asking right now if you want input about how that building will be used? Is that correct? Is that your question?
I actually have a couple slides next about that specifically. So in terms of specific uses, these ones are more about goals that we want met by whatever project we consider.
Okay, so maybe one of my questions would be, and I don't know, this isn't a goal that we've ever discussed, but would there be a goal of a certain percentage if housing was developed, a certain percentage of that housing somehow being affordable? So that's just a question of something to discuss.
Anything? Anything else? And I'll make the comment in advance of your next slides. If you think about the CDA and its history and how it came to be and the establishment of HUD, which is the driving force for much of what we do, the need for supporting people who have needs, whether it's affordable housing or whether it's handicapped or whether it's people who are disadvantaged in one way or another, to have those kinds of people in mind as we move forward with the whole of the project, I think would be important to the CDA.
Thank you. Jackie, you can go ahead.
All right, I will move forward, and then if anyone has comments and wants to revisit these questions, we can definitely do that.
Thank you.
All right, so the next couple of slides are potential uses. So getting a little bit more specific, based on our experience with redevelopment projects, these are likely uses that would make sense in this building that we feel could potentially meet the redevelopment objectives we discussed on previous slides. So multifamily housing, that could include affordable housing, that could include senior, could potentially be condos or apartments. At this point, I think we want to leave it open to see what developers have in mind. But of course, if we have a preference, we could further specify that in the RFQ. Potential for office space. I know the office market is a little challenging right now, but if there are spaces where this makes sense, I think this use could work really nicely in the West 2nd Street district. Potential for an art gallery or museum, ideally on the ground floor where people can easily access it, but could be in another part of the building as well. We've talked about this, but a ground floor restaurant, cafe, retail, or some sort of entertainment use where people, again, can engage with the building in a way that they can't do today. Potential for community maker space or art studios, so a place where people can come and either rent space or use tools by the hour to make things and be creative. So in alignment with some of our goals for the district as well. So I'll pause there to see what do you think about this list of potential uses? Is there anything else we should consider? I've heard affordable housing as a possibility. Love to hear more from the rest of you.
Chris.
It's a fine list. I don't have an objection to anything on the list, but a concern that there are a few things on there that we have in the downtown already, and it's a city-sponsored project. If there's any tax dollars going in to facilitate this project, we do run the risk of potentially creating competition with art space at the Chestnut Center, the museums downtown, maker space, et cetera. So that's just something to keep in mind as we're looking at these RFPs.
Go ahead, Russ.
Okay, you're gonna regret it. Thanks for the presentation so far, Jackie. For those of us that don't know you, what is your role? Are you like a project manager, or what is your role at
Sure, my job title is lead associate planner with Vanderwall and Associates. We're an economic development and city planning consulting firm.
Okay.
I'm working with, I would say the project management team is managing this project, which is comprised of Steve Barg, Carol Kerper from the CDA, and then Josh Miller for economic development.
Okay. That's a tough crowd to work with. I've got a bunch of things. I'm just going to throw them at you if you don't mind. You know, hopefully you can write these down. But when I'm listening to the RFQ and the overall proposal, one thing I would really like to learn about is grant availability, whether it be grant, brownfield, residential, economic development. When it comes to potential uses, I was kind of anticipating this as how do we position this project from a marketing perspective, anticipating there being negotiations. I would hope that we maximize the potential versus move too quickly because we think we need to develop it soon so we don't have to maintain it. You know what I mean? Like you said, a lot of communities would probably love to have a building like this. We already have one. So I would like to be smart about how we develop it and who we select to partner with. Another question I have is, when you look at a project like this, do you envision developers in the, central Wisconsin, upper Midwest, or is this a national type project that might bring someone in from
further away who specializes in this type of development. And during the process, do you have like an expected, I just call it like a return on investment for the city? That would be, you know, what do you expect, I guess, from a tax base improvement? The also tied to potential uses, you know, the trend by use, and I'll echo what Chris said about, are the list of potential uses for Marshfield, or are they is the list of potential uses for any building like this anywhere in the United States? Because I do already see some overlap and duplication with what we have. Office, you know, strikes me, a lot of people are working from home. We do have a number of museums, so I would just want to double check to make sure that we're not competing or overlapping with those existing facilities. Quick yes or no, I think I know the answer, but I don't, is the building on the historic register? And then, yeah, I think that's it for now, but I'll stay with you. I like the presentation so far. I guess my main thing is I just want to make sure that we optimize the potential, you know what I mean?
Natasha?
I'm just wondering if you could also add to the list, just as something to consider, a daycare or a preschool that would serve the residents who live there as well as downtown residents.
Great.
Chris?
Stepping back just one slide when you were talking about potential reuse objectives. One thing I noticed we didn't have listed there was anything around sustainability. And maybe that's not an important focus for the city, but I know that it was when we built our library, when we built our fire station, and we talked about the need for parking for potential residential folks in that area. So stormwater runoff, I know there's detention across the street, but anything we can do around sustainability might be advantageous in that area, and I think it makes sense to call that out as something we'd like to see as well, my opinion.
Mayor, could
Yes, sir,
I
Russ.
could, you know, listening to the ideas, kind of brainstorming, I would just like to caution us from trying to be everything to all people or all sectors. You know, it'd be admirable to have this or to have that. But if we think we're going to, you know, maximize the potential with this building by narrowing our focus, I'm all in on that. So you know, I think of downtown Minneapolis, downtown Seattle, downtown Milwaukee, where they've really done a good job of, you know, revitalizing the buildings, and or Omaha was there recently. And if that means that, you know, we find other locations for other aspects of our community needs, that would be good for me, you know. So I guess I'm open to the discussion of affordable housing or daycare or art studio, but I really think this building is going to kind of have its own brand, its own statement, if you will. And I think if we try to dilute it too broadly with too many potential uses, we may not hit the mark.
No other questions, Jackie? You can go right ahead.
All right. I can go, if you'd like, I'd go back and respond to those questions that were posed before.
That would be great.
All right. So, okay, one of the first questions was about grant availability. We are definitely expecting tax credits and grants to be part of anticipating that grants and tax credits will be part of the project. The project is on the state Register of Historic Places and the National Register of Historic Places. And so I would imagine most developers would be interested in pursuing historic preservation tax credits, which means they have to follow certain standards to keep the building looking the way it does now, preserve the historic character of the building, but that opens up funding in the form of tax credits for the project. So I'm expecting that to be part of that. There are grants for green building features or alternative energy features, such as solar on the roof and things like that. So that could be part of the capital stack if the developer was interested in that. I don't anticipate significant brownfields or contamination on the site. We are still reviewing and assessing that, but should contamination be found, there are substantial grant resources available to clean up any contamination that may be present. And so I definitely think there will be grants and other creative uses of funding to make this project possible. We're familiar with many of those sources. There's also grants available from Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation as well. And so we'll be looking at all of that as we move through this process. I think there's a question about where the developers might come from, whether they're local to Marshfield or national. I think we've got a list that we're working on now that we will send it out to. That list is primarily Wisconsin-based, but a lot of those developers do work nationally. I would be surprised if we found a developer from Marshfield that was able to take on this project. It's very complex, and most probably would not have the experience, although I don't want to rule anything out. The developer that we met with earlier this year was a Milwaukee-based developer with very comparable experience to take something like this on, but expect to be able to find several of those in Wisconsin and maybe surrounding states. There was a question about expected ROI. I think the short answer to that is when we select a developer and we move forward into the development agreement process with them, we ask them to submit a detailed pro forma, which shows all the sources of income and all the cash or the money or the funds that they're going to bring to the project, whether that's grants or their own resources or other sources, and then what the costs are associated with the project, and then how that balances out. And so we have a template that we run the developer's pro forma against to see if it cash flows basically based on our model. So the short answer is we have a model to check that, and that's kind of part of the lengthy development agreement negotiation process. Right. And then there's a note about just making sure the list of uses for the building aren't competing with other businesses in town. I think that's a great point. I think we'll see what our potential developers come back with in terms of uses, and we'll see, if we feel that it might be competing with local businesses. That's something we can address at that time. Okay, I think I've made it through all those questions. I'll go to my next slide here. Right there. I was going to transition to the schedule. So I think first I want to make sure that we've heard all the comments from the CDA and council on the content of the RFP and then our goals for reuse of the building. Any other comments or questions?
Natasha.
I don't know how specific. Oh, I'm sorry, Andrew. Did Andrew Rigo want to be? Because we can't see you, Andrew. Did he talk?
I was going to jump in and ask a question, but you can go first if you want to, Natasha.
Okay. I'm just wondering how specific you want us to be. Like when you say multifamily housing, can we say like accessible housing? How specific? I mean, I'm just throwing that out, but that would be something I would want someone to talk about.
Yeah, please, if you could expand on that and what you mean by accessible and.
Well, like would there be would there be ground floor units that elderly people could sell their home and move into that would also be ADA compliant, that maybe they could live their, last decade in, or things like that? Like, would a developer come forth with that sort of information if we didn't sort of indicate it?
I think if we're looking for something specific, we should include it in the RFQ. And the way the RFQ is drafted, a list of potential uses. So maybe I should make sure this is clear in the RFQ. We're not looking for someone to provide us all 6 things on this list, 5 things on this list. It's a combination of uses, or maybe it's just 1 or 2 uses that they think work for what they have the skill set to do.
Well, then I would just say from Marshfield and just from our population, we have a very elderly population that's continuing to age. So that would be a big market and also a big help for people to be able to downsize.
Alderman Spiros? Oh, Andrew, I'm sorry, and you belong to the mayor anyway.
Oh,
Go ahead, Andrew.
I do. Just briefly, maybe I'm out in left field here, but thought I'd just ask out of curiosity, but how do we anticipate controlling what we attract to these spaces? I mean, are these through covenants, or how are we dictating whether it's gonna be office space versus residential versus an art gallery versus a bar?
Sure. So that's done through the development agreement that we have with the developer. And so in that agreement, we can negotiate any terms that we feel are appropriate. So if they told us they were going to do a cafe and that's what we all agree, well, the use will be, will we build that into the development agreement? So we can actually get a bit more precise than we would with just regular zoning because we have a special agreement with the developer.
Go on. You answered my question, but I didn't mean to interrupt. I apologize.
Oh, no, it's okay. All I was going to say, if there were, you can write it any way you want. So if you wanted to list out a range of uses, so, you know, that cafe goes out of business and you want to bring in a retail frontage or a store, you could write it in such a way to allow for different uses, or write it in such a way that, you know, specific uses are not allowed.
Gotcha. Perfect. Thank you.
Rebecca?
So I'm just gonna piggyback on the point Andrew was making, because I was wondering sort of the same thing. I understand, you know, what an RFQ is. I don't understand what a development agreement is. But my question is if we become so restrictive, are we worried that we won't sell the building? I mean, I just don't know how we sell a building to developer and then try to tell him, you have to put a cafe here, that's what we want, and then we want 5 apartments on the ground level, and then we want 10 expensive apartments on the top. I mean, I feel like, I just feel like we're trying to be way too restrictive. I understand giving a generalization and a picture of what we want, but I don't think that we can be that specific or we're gonna scare away the buyers.
Mm-hmm.
Russ?
Kind of in that vein. So Jackie, you mentioned, use the term skill set of the developer. And when I hear that, I would rather hear expertise. You know, in other words, the developer may specialize in a certain type of development. And I wonder about the developer's expertise versus the highest best use for this building and this area of Marshfield. So it leads me to the question, you know, do we provide to the developer some type of background about Marshfield, or do we expect them to do a survey so they know what might best fit Marshfield?
Sure. Well, we've provided in the RFQ some pretty high-level information about the city. Most developers will do their own market research
Okay.
Before responding to an RFQ like this.
Okay.
And I agree, expertise would be a better term than skill set.
Thank you.
Natasha?
At what point do we have the discussion of whether nonprofits could use the space? I think that's, Andrew, Mr. Rego had talked about covenants, like if we're trying to expand tax base, do we have a certain percentage where nonprofits could come in? When would we talk about that? I just feel like it would need to be laid out earlier rather than later.
Yeah, we would be interested in having direction from all of you on that. I think that's something that will formally get hammered out during the development review process. But if there are thoughts on that now, I think that more information we have now is valuable.
Russ?
Okay, a little bit of a debate then. I don't think we've made much money on this building for as long as we've owned it. We probably lost a lot of money on this building. And I don't look at it as an opportunity for us to be what's the term I like to use? Just a generous community, philanthropic or whatever I look at it as an opportunity for us to really come home with an award-winning project that's going to generate some revenue for the city of Marshfield. We have other facilities that people can, use an office or a conference room for free. I just don't see that in this building. Again, I think it's a heck of an opportunity. I would just hope that we would not blow it by trying to be too many things to too many interest groups.
Chris?
Jackie, for the historic credits that are likely going to be used on a project like this, does that create any requirements around the housing, affordable housing that Natasha was mentioning, or does that put us in a position where we do have to look at some nonprofits for the historic tax credits?
The historic preservation tax credits do not come with any strings with regard to housing affordability. There are separate affordable housing tax credits that would. So if the developer were to pursue a affordable project and apply for affordable housing tax credits, that would, of course, require them to do affordable housing to get those credits.
No other questions, Jackie? You can move on. Thank you.
All right. With that, I will turn us to our project schedule. This is probably not something everybody has gone through. It sounds like some folks have gone through this process before, but for others, it's the first time. So I wanted to provide some details about the schedule. You'll notice that the schedule is more detailed for dates that are coming up and much less detailed as we get further out in the timeline. As you can imagine, we keep that pretty flexible so that we can adjust. Basically, we are currently in the developer selection period. We're hoping to have adult developers selected by February of this coming year. Our goal is to issue this RFQ. We'll respond to the comments and input we've received this evening, finalize that document, and then issue it on November 8th. We're also working to coordinate a tour of the building so that the prospective developers could actually come and see the building. That date is still being set, but we will include that information in the RFQ. Developers have opportunities to ask questions and get a response from the project management team. And so we'll have those completed by December 20th. If there's a desire to hold interviews, those would be held in early January. I guess one thing that's missing in here is that we'll have a selection committee to help go through the responses that are received and determine who moves on, who might be interviewed, et cetera. We'll talk about that later on the agenda. And then from there, we would ask the CDA to recommend the preferred developer formally, and then followed by approval by the council. Then the next two phases include the development agreement negotiation. So that's a long timeline. We penciled it in for February to July of next year. As I mentioned before, this can be fairly complex with different funding sources, negotiation about what those uses will be. There's housing, how many units that would be, if they're affordable units, how many affordable units there would be. All those details would get finalized for this development agreement negotiation period. During that period, we would enter into an exclusive right to negotiate period with the selected developer. So that basically means we agree we're not going to sell the property to somebody else while we're negotiating with this developer. And so they feel some security in spending time and effort in coming to terms with the city. We usually prepare a term sheet, which outlines the key details of the agreement. Rather than putting in full development agreement contract form, which is difficult to digest sometimes. We have a term sheet that just has kind of the key terms of the deal. That would be reviewed by the CDA and the council, likely in the May timeframe. And then the final development agreements, the actual contract itself, potentially approved in July. Following approval of the development agreement, we move into implementation. I provided a lot less detail here, but that's when we go through project entitlement, any zoning approvals that are needed, financing, final financing details, issuing of permits. And then ideally that would have us ready to transfer the property in the spring of 2026. That's when we're expecting Weinbrenner Company to vacate the building. At that point, the developer could take ownership and begin construction. So I'll pause there. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions or move on to the next agenda item.
Jackie, this is Steve. This may be more for the project management team, and I know we're meeting again on Thursday morning, but I assume there is or will be ultimately become a checklist of things that the city can and should be doing during this process, separate from the actual RFQ process, to keep things moving along. What's expected to hopefully be a successful conclusion.
Right. Well, we're working on and have sent some items already for the PMT to work through. Details like coordinating with Wisconsin Historical Society and other steps that are not part of the RFP process per se, but are really essential to keep this on track.
Sounds good.
Mike O'Reilly? Oh, I'm sorry, Alderman Werman? I just saw your hand up.
No worries at all.
Thank you.
I know you guys have screens up, so thank you. I just wanted to ask real quick, and this is probably mostly for Jackie, but anybody who's been through this process, I know I have been not for the city, but I have been for my work purposes. Is there any reason that we wouldn't do interviews? Because I feel like that's our best opportunity to find out if it's a real match between developer and what our city's alignment is. And that's been a big discussion for us recently, is what is our strategy going to be going into not only 2025, but then the next, hopefully, several years. And so I think that would be, a gigantic miss if we didn't have that interview to make sure that we were all kind of aligned on that this developer would be the right person, given what our intent is going forward, not just with this building, but the community as a whole.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I think the only circumstance in which you would not do interviews would be if you had only one really excellent submission and you just wanted to move forward with that proposal. But I think in all likelihood, we would want to do interviews.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I don't have any question exactly. Well, I guess it is a question. I'm thinking back to a development that occurred actually that I know in Milwaukee. They didn't take an existing building, they built new. It's apartments, some are affordable, some are not. The ground floor is almost entirely taken up by a grocery store, a supermarket. They added a parking garage to the rear of the building. It seemed to me that what they looked for was to provide a variety of kinds of housing, some retail space that took up much of the ground floor. Is that kind of vision appropriate for what we're talking about with the Weinbrenner building? A kind of multi-use facility?
I think there's definitely potential for that. I guess and certainly if there was an opportunity to bring in a ground floor tenant that, like a grocer or something that was really exciting, we would want to pursue that. One of the main goals of the West 2nd Street District Plan is to incorporate some new commercial uses, but not overextend the amount of new commercial we're bringing in. Because we've been very careful to not kind of undercut the success of the Central Avenue corridor. And so the recommendation in the plan is just for a small area of commercial on the ground floor in the Weinbrenner building. And potentially the rest of that ground floor would be residential. However, you know, if a developer came forward and thought it was market feasible and they had some ideas about non-residential first floor, kind of more of a true mixed-use building, I'd certainly be interested in hearing more about it. I think we just want to balance that with, you know, not bringing in too much commercial that will compete with existing businesses and, you know, what they had in mind for that tenant.
Thank you. I'll make one other comment then. I've heard a number of people talk about avoiding, if we can, competition with existing facilities and activities in the city. But no one has talked about looking for opportunities to collaborate and cooperate with existing activities in the city and into a new or a rebuilt facility. I can think of one that I don't know that would be much a tax benefit, but I served on the New Visions board for a good period of time, and the clinic has an incredible art collection that they have now spread to their smaller sites all over northern Wisconsin. But they still have a lot that isn't displayed, isn't used. They have, anyway, it would seem to me that if we talk about art at all, the opportunity to collaborate is really extraordinary. And there may be other ways to collaborate in terms of restaurant, in terms of other retail establishments. It would seem to me that we should look for those opportunities too. I'd like to be able to benefit in some way Central Avenue downtown with this facility as well.
Right?
Any other comments, questions from either the council or the CDA? Ashley?
I think one thing that we really haven't discussed as far as like an amazing community to raise a family, and just giving thought to family activities potentially that could be happening on that ground level, whether maybe it's a children's museum. I know we have other museums. They lost our bowling alley. Just different things that maybe families can do together when considering some of the development we would want to see in that building.
Just Steve again, Jackie, you know, you mentioned that the developers will be given some high-level information, statistics and those kind of things about the city. But as we get more serious with the developer kind of honing in on somebody, they're obviously going to have done their own market study. They're going to have an idea what price points might be possible for apartments and those types of things. So I imagine when we get down to that nitty-gritty, there's going to be some discussion where we might be looking for a certain type of development and they might be suggesting that that is or is not feasible in terms of attracting and keeping the tenants we'd be looking for. So I'm not sure I'm even asking a question at this point. I'm just sort of planting the seed that that's probably where it ends at some point. What can be done versus what we'd like to be seeing happen and trying to find a ground that's workable.
No other questions, Jackie?
Okay. That's all from me.
Okay.
Okay, so next up, we are going to determine membership for the RFQ selection committee.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And Jackie has talked about that with me and the project management team. I think your best thought, Jackie, is maybe a committee of 5 people, which would be 2 CDA members, 2 council members, and that I would be on that as well. I guess the 2 council members could also be dual, as we have here tonight. They could be council and CDA members, just so we have some people representing the CDA viewpoint, if you will, in the discussion. So with that in mind, if you're still thinking that's a good model, and I see you nodding your head, Jackie, we'd be looking to see whether tonight or subsequent to this, there'd be 2 members of the council and 2 members of the CDA who'd be willing to serve on that selection committee as we hopefully get, you know, multiple proposals from developers.
So I open the floor for anybody who would like to volunteer from the Common Council. I see no hands raising.
From the CDA, I'd be glad to select the volunteers.
Oh, I'm not doing that, Andy. No way. Sorry. Nope. That's not a political hat. Andy actually raised his hand, and now we have three with their hands raised. Okay, so how about we do Andy and Brian Varsho? Thank you both for stepping up. Andy, you did have your hand raised, correct? Even if you didn't, that's
I
it.
did, yes,
Okay,
correct,
yep,
correct.
just like Andy said, yeah.
I know.
So then, Andy, you'll find you two.
Oh, yes.
And if you would let us know, that would be great, because we want to do that right now.
And Dave will serve on such a committee. Ashley, would you be willing? Ashley. So it's Dave LaFontaine and Ashley.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you.
We have our 5 members. Thank you very much.
Excellent, appreciate it.
Next up, identify next steps, including action items and timeline.
I think actually Jackie's gone through the project timeline
Yep.
pretty well, and, the next action steps in the RFQ process will be the ones we'll be focusing on. Good to have a committee already set up to deal with that process. We'll keep both bodies informed. I put this on the agenda not knowing what was going to be left over after the presentation and questions. I'm not sure there is much more to talk about at this point in terms of timeline. I think she's laid out a very good process for us to follow over the next year plus. So unless there's any questions, I would suspect that we have come to the end, basically.
Andy, would you like to adjourn the CDA?
Yes, I have to say that the Weinbrenner development seems to me to be one of the most exciting opportunities the city has had in a while, and I appreciate being able to, for the CDA to be able to participate in what's going on. If there are no additional questions or comments from the CDA commissioners, I'll say we're adjourned.
And I, as well as Mayor from the Common Council, we are adjourned. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thanks, everybody.